All right, let me get back to sharing my screen and we're going to get started. A content note, we are going to talk about a lot of different violences in the family. We're going to talk about sexual violence. We're going to talk about interpersonal violence, domestic violence, dating violence. We're going to talk about incest. We're going to talk about child abuse. This is one of those lectures where if you need to take your time with it, do so. If you need to find your coping strategies, find your safe place to do it, do it. If you need to not do this one, then don't. Okay. The majority of this is going to be talking about what happens. Now, I will say, because we've already done a lecture on rape, that particular section on sexual violence is more about the activism side and more about the movements and social justice movements that are working towards eradicating that particular violence. Because I did not think that getting back into that topic is something that we need to do again, given its weight and its frequency within students on university campus, especially female students on university campuses. So again, if you need to not, now's your time to turn it off. Okay. We will be also, I'm going to start with changing patterns in families instead of starting with the violence. And just talk about some LGBTQ plus families. If you want to hang out for that one, I will give you a warning before we move to the next one. Okay. All right. Let's do this. All right. So, changes in marriage and cohabitation, right? So there's a lot more people that are cohabitating instead of getting married or prior to getting married. And that's just living together in a sexual relationship outside of marriage. And it's way more common than it was in the past. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's showing essentially, I think I have it on a different slide. I'm not entirely sure which one. But there's on a different slide, there's a graphic that just shows people's perspectives of what they think or why they think that what those particular relationships are about. And I think it's back in symbolic interactions. Yeah. So when you go back here, this is going to show some of those reasons why people are living with a partner, cohabitating versus married. And you're going to see those changing dynamics in here. But so they are back in another section. But again, there's a wide variety of reasons for that. Economically, it's really hard to survive on your own. And so cohabitating before you're married or cohabitating while you're dating can put a lot less economic stress on you as a human and on your partner as a human, which then has a way less stress within the relationship. It also is less commitment than marriage, right? It's less paperwork, it's less formality, and sometimes that's better for some people. It also allows the individuals to keep finances separate or to not tie things that they may not be ready to do so. Remaining single is also something that is growing within our society. And there's serious stigma against women who stay single, less so with men because there's this assumption that no matter what age they are, they can find a partner and that their partners are supposed to be younger than them anyway. And that it's okay to have wide marriage gaps for men. For women, there's a different kind of stigma, right? You're supposed to get married when you're younger, not young, but younger, before you've gotten out of reproductive age, right? And there's certain stigmas because to an extent this society has kept women tied to childbirth, tied to marriage as the big cornerstones in their lifestyle. However, women are kind of like, wait a minute, we can have careers too. We don't have to necessarily be tied down to a relationship, and we can still date. We can still have intimacy. We can still have a large friend base. We can still do what we want to do. Staying single is perfectly fine. And that's just a change in dynamics and change of, again, ability to have economic security as a single woman, the ability to have a level of freedom, a level of control over your life that didn't exist in prior eras. And then some people choose not to marry. They build strong networks of friendships and they build intimacy through sexual relationships that aren't necessarily committed. And that's okay. We also are seeing a rise in couples without children. And there's a crap ton of reasons for that, right? There is some controversy over the term either childless or child free. Child less kind of assumes this idea that they're losing something or they're missing something or they're missing a part of what they're supposed to be versus child free is kind of saying it is giving more autonomy to that decision. There's many reasons again for not having children. The infertility, they can decide that they don't want to raise kids in the environment, whether it's politically, socially, or environmentally, to put that strain on the world. It can be they can choose not to have kids because they don't like kids or they don't get along with kids or that wouldn't fit into their lifestyle choices. There's a wide variety of reasons. Some couples cannot have kids, and fertility is also on the rise due to a wide variety of both environmental and social. Well, not there are a large variety of human, not deficiency is not the word I want to use because that's super unfair. The infertility can come due to all sorts of genetic variations, all sorts of bodily variations, all sorts of toxins and chemicals within the environment, all sorts of a wide range of things from what's in foods to what resources do you have to what malnutrition you might have had to the way in which your body developed or the resources you had once during those periods of times. There's a wide variety of reasons why infertility happens, but it is never the person's fault. All right. Many talk about having children one day or maybe in the future, or there's this kind of hypothetical bubble that says, hey, it's over here. We'll do it if we do it. We won't if we won't. Right. And that's okay. And then again, there is impacts on happiness in old age just because so much of aging comes with that ability to have support. And when you have kids, you are more likely to have a support structure when you age. However, that can also happen through friend bases. That can also happen through nieces and nephews. That can happen through other family dynamics as well. Extended families in the past allowed older relatives to maintain their position of authority. We used to, and we do to some extent now, kind of derive this level of hierarchy where the older you were, kind of the more you knew, right? There was a wisdom to it. There was an ability to kind of go to these people as, hey, you're somebody who's lived through this much. I can ask you questions about my life because you have so much experience in life to give, right? But there is a lot more degrading of elderly as incompetent or as even infantizing them or making them seem very young or babyish or like that they are incapable of taking care of themselves. There's a lot of issues with autonomy as you age, and a lot of issues with when will my keys get taken away? When am I going to have no freedoms? When am I not going to be able to take care of myself? All of these things have a large and varying degree of impact on the older person and all of their support network, right? Nuclear families are still the dominant family form today. And because of that, there's not as many generational households. There's not as many things they can do to keep care of those other individuals in their household. All right. Sorry, my dogs are, the mailman is coming. Their smaller size makes it easier for members to be isolated. And that's just because within a nuclear family, right, you're going to have your kids, you and your spouse. But as your kids age, they're going to leave the house, which leaves you maybe with your spouse. But if you're a single parent, that might leave you alone, because there's not this intergenerational idea of living. It leaves you more likely to be isolated. Um, Elderly aren't being abandoned. Only 1 in 5 really live alone. And that's just because there's a growing number of nursing homes and other options. Only 3% of aged people live in nursing homes. Most elderly prefer some kind of intimacy at a distance, right? So, um, most elderly Americans enjoy really good health and the company of family and friends. So you have to remember that as we age, we don't just randomly wake up one day and have no ability to function, right? Aging is a process. It's a process of how someone lives. It's a process that is impacted by society. It's impacted by their environment. It's impacted by their economic status, right? It's impacted by all of the other identities they carry. Because when you age, if you're a very active person, you're likely to be a very active person for an extended period of time. My great grandparents, I had until I was well into my 20s. I had both my kids when my great grandfather passed away. And they were in their 90s and they would still go out and power wash their house during the season because they lived um, out kind of in the country. And so they had to power wash all of the grime and gunk off their house at least once or twice a year. And so they always did it right before spring season to get all the leaves and all of that stuff off from winter. And they just kept moving. They kept doing and they kept doing. And the more they did and the more involved they got, they just kept living. And I don't ever remember, like, I remember the last couple years were only the years that they weren't really super active. And that just came down to essentially they chose a different lifestyle and they lived that lifestyle until they couldn't anymore. And that, I mean, that was well into their 90s. Look at Betty White. Betty White is a prime example of aging with class, grace, and you like she was, I swear she was what, 70 for like 50 years. I'm just like she just stayed Betty White, right? Like she stayed active, she stayed doing. And yes, there's a wide variety of economic difference between what Betty White had the ability to be when it came in terms of healthcare, when it came in terms of what she could go do, and the support network she could have for herself. However, um, to an extent, we're building communities that have more and more aging people. And because of that, there are more and more supports, there are more and more peer groups, there are more and more ability for these people to do things. And in doing that, you're creating not just longer lives, but longer capability of actually living them. And so perceptions of age are likely going to change again. And that's just because we have such a growing number of uh, people that are going to be getting older comparatively to those that are young, just because we haven't had major wars that have taken out super like tons and tons of our young people, our young men especially. We haven't had we have the advantage of science and technology to keep people healthier for longer. And again, in doing all of that, we will have a lot more older people. And with people having less kids and people choosing not to have kids, in some circumstances, the reproduction rate is not going to, like, there's going to be a shift in dynamics. So there's going to be per population more older people to that population than there are super young, just because there's major differences happening. And that's going to provide a lot more community resources because there's going to be a lot more people in that community that have access to ask for what they want, right? And then we're going to talk a little bit about being a widow. I put some pictures up here because I wanted to show that being a widow doesn't always, like, there's this assumption that being a widow means that you are old. And these families aren't, right? Like their spouses passed away for various reasons, and that can happen when they were younger, when the kids were still younger. And there's a varying ways in which those families process that, they grieve that, they deal with that. And sometimes when it comes to especially the kiddos, they can live with different understandings about life, with different understandings about death, different understandings about how to embark on a relationship or a knowing of someone, because they're going to grow up possibly with a parent that is deceased but is still a very big presence in their life due to the amount of people that are going to tell them stories, due to the amount of time they might spend maybe talking to them, um like one-way conversations, like talking to them out in whatever religious ideology they have, for the afterlife, to be able to kind of have this relationship with an entity that is derived out of a societal need to have that family dynamic in a specific way, but with still lacking, the physical presence of one of their parents. And again, this can lead to a really, um, some really cool relationships within that structure, um, to, like, for the single parent that is left, the widowed parent that is left, and the other kids, they can form really unique bonds due to the fact that they've all survived this loss together, or due to the fact that, um, this loss has them living just a hair differently, right? Now, that's not to say that that doesn't come with struggles, that doesn't come with similar struggles back to being a single parent, that doesn't come with also economic strain, in a time where you're raising kids, which is not cheap. um, et cetera, et cetera. But widowhood also is very likely, when you have a spouse and you are elderly, that one person is going to outlive the other one. Um, and that within that particular dynamic, and more often it is women that outlive the men than it is men that outlive the women. And that again comes down to this societal understanding that, um, that men should be older than their spouses. Um, it's also comes down to the fact that currently women still live longer than men statistically. And all of these things have a wide variety of, um, impacts on those who are widowed, right? So depending on who leaves first, depending on what the other person did, if the other person was in charge of finances, if the other person, um, did things like I know that when my granny lost her husband, we had to teach her how to use a gas pump. One of the things he just did for her, it was just one of, it wasn't necessarily like a, she couldn't have learned, or that it, like he was like, no, you can't go do this. It was just something he always did for her. He always made sure her gas tank was full so that she just didn't have to worry about it. It was just like this cute gesture. But in doing so, when she lost him, she had to learn how to do that at, um, at 74. Um, yeah, maybe she was 73. Either way. Um, and that's a really big change, right? It's the little things that you don't realize the other person may do automatically, that then you have to take on those roles too, and that can be really overwhelming. The loss of someone that you have had and been around through multiple periods of your life, and for an extended period of time, losing that person can come with a great deal of, I don't know what to do, because I've tied so much of my life or my daily communication, or like, and they're likely retired, um, in these particular settings. And so just the day to day, hey, we're watching the show we always watch. Wait a minute, you're not there, right? Like there's all these instant things. And without a good amount of support, it's going to be much harder for that individual um, to cope with their grief, right? Because when you don't have that social network to fall back on, when you don't have, that ability to keep moving or keep doing the things you might have done anyway. So you might have had, um, like my grandmother on the other side had bridge, like she has a card group that she has. She would go do, water aerobics at the Y, right? Like these things, or at the college, even, I think. Um, but she had activities to do, and because she had activities to do, not to say her grief was any less at all, or not to say that her loss was any less, but instead it allowed her a different level of the support network than, say, someone who didn't have that and they had more just the two of them, right? The support networks are going to be very different there. And that's important with how you end up coping with those losses. All right. Let's talk about some LGBTQ plus families. Your book was terrible about even approaching or even talking about this topic. So I took it upon myself to pull one of the slides from uh, that I use in a different class. And again, there's a lot of information that I could give about this topic. I'm going to try to make it brief. So, uh, gay families or same sex couples are more likely to live in larger cities. They're more likely to be educated and less likely to have children. And that's because there's been a lot of obstacles, not just because of a lack of desire, but also there's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of financial obligations when it comes to being able to have kids. When you're in same sex relationships, right? Do you adopt? Do you decide to foster? Do you decide to use a surrogate? Do you decide to um, use donor sperm? Like all of these things can be complicated, can be really hard. Conversations can be expensive depending on what kind of things need to happen in order to make that pregnancy. Um, and it can lead to just a lack of being able to have the resources to have kiddos or to start the families in the same way. There tends to be, okay, so there's some debate over this, but there can be some more equity in household labor. But again, that's going to depend widely on how that can depend based on if there's serious economic differences within the two people in the relationship, or three people, or however many people are in the relationship. It depends on age. It can depend on um, social statuses and other ways. All of these things can vary how that hierarchy happens and who does more of the household labor. It can create new family forms, um, and the myth of that typical gay family is just inaccurate, right? There's too much intersectionality. There's too many things that can change or differ between any kind of both marriage, whether they have kids, whether there's a polyamorous situation, whether they have chosen family, or people that they've just kept because they all and that is their family because possibly they don't communicate with biological family. There's a wide variety of ways in which LGBTQ families operate or can look in similar ways to where there's a million different ways that heteronormative couples or heteronormative family structures can work, because you have single parents, you have widowed, you have blended families. All of these things are legitimate, all of these things are valid. And within LGBT communities, you're also going to see a wide variety of family styles, family creations, and those are going to be impacted depending on, again, your economic resources, your ability to live in a state that is relatively structured or queer friendly. There's a wide variety of reasons why that might be. So exiles from kinships. LGBT families have a it's getting better, but there's still a way too high of a percentage of family exiles that happen when people come out or when people are outed within their family. Some of these are exits intentionally due to toxicity or harms that might come to you by staying in your family. Families are more likely to reject LGBTQ plus youth than they are heteronormative youth. Um, you have cutting ties with non-affirming families can be really, really hard. It can be really dramatic. It can be really traumatizing. It can be really but on the flip side, it also can be really relief. It can be affirming. It can be depending on the support network you have, depending on if you have some chosen family, depending on if you have people, um, it can be much more, um, it can be much easier when you have those support networks. Links between families and institution and oppression, patriarchy, and compulsory heterosexuality. Okay, so family is an institution. When we think of family, we don't automatically think of all of the variations of family. Sometimes, like that automatic picture that is taught to us through movies, through media, through school, through even our family dynamics, is really there's a mom, there's a dad, there's a couple of kids, maybe a dog, maybe a house. Right? Like these things are ingrained into you when you think of family sitcoms. Up until very recently, most of the time, you were looking at that nuclear family, the mom and a dad and a couple of kids, and grandparents that may show up to make funny, funny sitcom moments, right? But you don't see a lot of mix. Now that is getting better. There's been a wide variety of shows, really in the last 2 decades, that have done better with that. There are other shows that came before that, don't hear me wrong. Um, but there's a lot of links to how this family as an institution really links back to, we've already talked about a history of patriarchy and oppression for women. We've also talked about the fact that it is very heteronormative, right? It is very much thought of as a man and a wife. Still, that is still the predominantly sent message within our society. There are limits again of accepting of gay parenting that has gotten significantly better in the 1970s forward. I would like to say we're getting better, but then we also have, just last year had a Supreme Court case where institutions or adoptions agencies can intentionally deny the adoptions for LGBTQ plus families or parents because they're within the LGBTQ plus community. So I would like to say it's getting better, but there's still a lot of pushback. There's still a lot of concerns. I know that my partner and I, when we were with the kids, there was always an assumption that we were two moms, friends that were hanging out, and each one of us had a kid, right? It wasn't until there was like Mama Annie and Mama Christie or what have you that you saw that. And then when that particular split happened and I ended up in a relationship with a more heteronormative look to it, there's never the assumption that he is not their father, which is interesting, right? Because there's always an assumption that one of us was not a parent when that relationship looked queer, but there has never been an assumption that one of us was not the parent in a heteronormative dynamic, no matter how much, no matter if biology is there or not, which is interesting, right? There is a wide variety of custody issues that have come up for LGBTQ plus parents, whether it be the legitimacy of one parent's legal rights, given that maybe one was biologically related and one is not. Maybe one used one sperm and maybe not the others, or one was carried the child and they used a donor sperm. So there's a lot of legalities that have had to be worked out and are still kind of getting worked out when it comes to custody issues. Not to mention, there's a long history of rejecting or refusing custody of children with LGBTQ parents and taking those kids away just for the fact that those parents are queer. And so there's a long history of maintaining invisibility of their queerness in parenting spaces to make sure that those particular things don't happen. You're seeing a lot of bills and laws going up that affirming parents of trans kiddos can get their kids taken away just for affirming those kiddos and be put into the system where they won't be affirmed, and finding particular things that could cause them a lot of harm, right? So family definitely crosses over the parenting, and the legalities of parenting cross over with LGBTQ plus in very harmful ways at times. Chosen families are families of choice, depending on which way you want to, how you want to label them. Chosen families is usually the term I use, but they're the people in your life that are always there. They're your support network. And for LGBTQ plus, sometimes because biological family isn't necessarily part of the picture, these people who create chosen family with the people who support you and your network, right? Who support you and your group. And these can be really important people, right? These are people that maybe, and not to say that other people can't have chosen families. There's a wide variety of marginalized groups and or just people that choose their chosen families for a variety of reasons. It's that best friend that is an aunt to your kids, right? It's the network of people that help you raise your kids. It's the network of people that help you and support you if you as a human were not doing okay. All of these things can be there for a reason, and chosen families are something that are incredibly important when it comes to the support of LGBTQ plus people. And a lot of people also, a lot of LGBTQ plus couples or families are going to combine some bio family members with chosen family members because you're going to choose generally who supports you, or you're going to choose maybe people who can help you teach bio families that it's okay, or you're gonna have dynamics, a wide variety of dynamics, and there's a lot of people that stay in touch with bio families that may not approve or may not be good, and just kind of take that toxicity because they want those people in their life, or they keep invisible because they want those people in their life. And there's a wide variety of ways in which people have to handle that, depending on safety, depending on isolation, depending on economic stressors, et cetera, et cetera. So for trans kiddos, parents are vital in the life of LGBTQ plus children, period, full stop. Parental support is the number one mental health solution, physical health solution for LGBTQ plus kids. And that's really for any kid, right? Parental support and affirmation is one of the biggest and most important things you will do as a parent. And when it comes to a child's identity or self-discovery or self-expression, harnessing resentment, or harnessing self-doubt, or harnessing self-harm has such a long, wide, and deep causes wounds that take a really long time to heal if they can be healed. So support and affirmation of these kiddos is 100% needed. It is the only choice if you want happy, healthy, and functioning kiddo that comes into adulthood, right? You cannot have a happy, healthy, and functioning adult if there has been a constant level of disrespect, lack of autonomy, no affirmation, and no support within their core family structure. I'm not to say, that's not to say that trans persons can't find that elsewhere. It's to say that that dynamic will never, ever, ever create anything but harms, right? You're not going to just doubt or wash your kid free of something that you don't want them to be just because you don't want that for them. That's just not, that's not how the world works, right? You can give them so much self-doubt and you can give them so much self-hatred that they can cause harm to themselves, including suicide. Um, but the likelihood that they're just going to go, oh, okay, I was wrong. You're right. I don't know who I am is highly unlikely. What instead you are going to create is a wall between you and the person you love and the person you care for in a way that may not ever be able to be bridged or broken down or um, be able to garner the support and love and relationship that you may want with that kiddo as they grow and learn to be who they are. The misarguments against gay parenting. Gay parents do not turn their kids gay. If or when you see statistics that there's a difference between the amount of gay kids that come out of gay parenting versus the amount that come out of straight parenting, more likely that is due to the fact that queer parents are much more affirming and much more likely to be able to be open to kids telling them that they also may have a varying degree of sexuality. Because they're queer, they're more likely to be able to hear that, to affirm that. Um, Heteronormative parents may not have those kids or queer kids, but they may not know it, or they may not be able to be a trusted person that that person could tell. And so they're not out, queer parents are not out there trying to turn the whole world queer. What their goal is to make it so that queer people don't have to be invisible, that queer people can be safe, and that queer communities have support, love, and respect. All right. Um, Queer parents are not sexually promiscuous and or are not risk of perpetrating harm. Okay, I am not saying that no one that identifies as a LGBTQ plus person has ever been a sexual predator, right? What I am saying, hear my words, is that sexual promiscuity is not related to parenting one's child. Those two things are separate. Those two things happen separately. And for most humans, there is zero risk of perpetrating harm on kids. However, as with any other demographic, there are people within that demographic or that identify that way that do cause harm. Those people, regardless of identity, are not okay. What they are doing is causing harm and causing violence to another person. Those people and the acts that they do are those people, and those acts require attention and require some level of consequence, right? That does not mean that the entire identity of that person, everyone in that identity, is that action. It means that person did that action, right? LGBTQ plus parents are not unstable or likely to separate any more so um, than straight parents. And I say that because remember, we just talked about divorce, and for every two marriages, there's a divorce, right? So that being said, the divorce rate is already there. It's already high, and LGBTQ plus people have only garnered the right to be married federally since 2015. So they haven't had the ability to just do whatever and have these massively high divorce rates, and they're just going to get married and separate, get married and separate. Again, the divorce rate is already high. It was high long before people get LGBTQ plus could get married. They are no more likely to separate than anyone else. There's a stigma and ostracized by peers. So these kids are going to get made fun of because they have queer parents. If that is the case, whatever situation that is in, that needs to get handled. Okay. Because that is not the fault of the kid. It is not the fault of the queer parents. It is the fault of the person who is doing the bullying, who is doing the ostracizing, who is doing the um, inappropriate action. Right. So if you're in a school setting and a kiddo is getting made fun of for having two moms, then the issue is that that school is not dealing with that classroom is not dealing with that, and that we are not creating an inclusive environment. That issue is not the kid or the two moms. Okay. Just for the record. And there is zero evidence of any of these arguments, that any of these things are backed by legitimate science. But yet judges and adoption agencies consistently use this rationale in custody cases in order to keep LGBTQ people from being parents or getting to keep their kids. A reminder that queer people also have a wide variety of intersection identities that also can impact custody, that also can impact whether they want to be parents, can impact their relationships, can impact a whole variety of other things. All right. So here's where I say big, huge, get off the screen now if you need to. We are about to talk about things that are not fun to talk about. And we are about to talk about all those things that I gave you content warnings for in the beginning of this. All right. So violence overview. Like I said, we're not going to get into a wide variety of things when it comes to rape specifically, but I did want to put up some of the movements here. If you have any questions about any of these movements, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I can get you local links. I can get you the essentially the cause statements or the mission statements for any one of these organizations and or movements, etc. All right, so let's talk about interpersonal violence for a little bit. Domestic violence awareness month is in October. Their ribbon is purple. And that's just because I wanted to make sure that we know that there are big drives and big movements out there that are working on this particular topic. If this has happened to you, whether it is in an intimate person, whether it's in a domestic setting, whether it is in a dating setting, you are not alone. You are not alone. About 1 in 3 women and about 1 in 4 men report having experienced severe physical violence from an intimate person, from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And all of these resources come from the same place for the all of these three. And I believe they're either the National Health Institute, it's on there somewhere, or nope, CDC. 14% of women and 5% of men report having been stalked by an intimate partner. So this is not just for the record, intimate personal violence is not just physical violence. It could be emotional violence. It can be economic violence. It can be stalking. It can be sexual violence. There is a lot of things that are covered within this topic. Prevention is possible. You've got some ways in which you can prevent or work towards the elimination of interpersonal violence. Also, the term intimate personal violence is intentional because domestic violence requires you to think about a domestic partnership, which was for a long time identified as a marriage, which did not include a wide scope of interpersonal violence. And so that particular term has been used instead of domestic violence by researchers in the field in order to kind of make sure we're being as inclusive as possible and really getting the full range of the concerns. All right, so research is inconclusive, and there's a lot of reasons for this. This again is a protected class, a protected population when it comes to research, because it is something that these individuals have gone through a level of harm um, within society. And so we want to make sure that you don't re-traumatize them. You want to make sure that you are doing research that is helpful. Um, you also have a level of isolation, a level of um, barriers that come between reporting, that come between talking about it, that even come between acknowledging it for that individual. And there's a wide variety of reasons why people don't want to talk about this topic or don't want to talk about when things happen to them or disclose those. So you have a wide variety of research. Now, that is not to say that there is no research out there. This is a topic that a lot of people have taken on because this is something that we want to fix in society. It is something that is included within the work that I do. It is something that is included within the work of the survivors group that works with the Attorney General in Kentucky. There's a wide variety of um, both nonprofit and governmental and um, also just activist groups that are working specifically on this cause, specifically on research on this cause. And so I'm not telling you not to trust research. I'm telling you that every researcher will pivot and say, here's the research, and this is why it is likely much higher than what we got, right? Because we're just don't have the reporting numbers that are accurate because of all the ways people list the reasons they would not report, right? So you might have somebody that doesn't report violence to you, but as you're sitting there in a conversation, will give you and express acts of violence that have happened to them. And that's because owning that particular violence or owning that that happened to you may be more damaging than actually just saying, well, this is a thing that happened, but I'm not a victim. I'm not this. I'm not this, right? There's a way in which the acknowledgement of it itself can be harmful. All right. Um, this is a really serious issue, and it's something that is worth the attention. Um, there's a lot of people this impacts. This is a ridiculously high percentage of our population that experiences these things. Um, and that harm leaves scars, right? It leaves scars for both the individual and even the community at whole, depending on what kind of violence is done and why. Um, Speaking of which, you have situational violence, you have patriarchal terrorism. That is a term that is used by feminist scholars when the particular intimate personal violence is directly correlated with a male person intending to control and harm and use harm as a tactic of control of a female person. Okay. Um, Situational violence is more uh, built around a particular incident or a particular um, like, hey, people, these two particular people in a relationship get into really big spats or really big fights, and those fights turn physical, right? Um, it's situational based on a particular type of incident, right? Usually within intimate personal violence, there is a power imbalance. That power imbalance can be a wide variety of things, including gender, including sexuality, including economic status, including physical, like actual physical body types. It can be disability. It could be a whole lot of different identity types that can cause this power imbalance. Um, it's an it's not completely invisible, but it's an issue that sometimes gets shoved as a personal issue, and so we don't necessarily have as many resources as we need and or as much research or time or energy being placed on this particular topic because it is something that society is still kind of looking at as this thing that you deal with on your own. It's a personal matter. It's a family matter. It's that couple's concern or what have you. It's looked at, and because of that, it's not looking at how all of the different structural components of the society impact those particular settings. Homophobia within law enforcement keeps and racial implications in law enforcement keep interpersonal violence victims from being able to end immigration policy and disability policy. There's a wide variety of institutional measures that keep individuals from seeking out law enforcement help or seeking out any kind of help that has to do with the justice system in matters of intimate personal violence. And then again, there's lots of assumptions, including the ones in your textbook, that made me very frustrated. And will probably have me writing another letter to this author. But there's a large assumption that there's wide amounts of mutual violence and that these are not power dynamic issues. Most intimate personal violence is committed by men towards women, period, full stop. Full stop. Almost every ounce of research shows that. However, your book decided to pull out some dated and questionable research to talk about the ways in which men and women start fights that are physical at the same capacity. That is not to say that women are not capable of doing these things. What I am saying is statistically, this power imbalance is most often occurs with gender in a relationship dynamic, and most often occurs by a man perpetrated towards a woman. Okay, full stop. All right. There are varying reasons why people can't leave, why people can't say anything, why people can't come out, and I have listed these. I'm not going to go over all of these because I want you to kind of sit with them. I want you to kind of look at them. They matter. And it's something that we may talk about in another assignment. I also added this graphic in here to talk about the ways in which abuse happens. So these are all the different kinds of abuse that can happen. The main factor here is control, right? No matter what the kind of abuse is, it's about control over another human being. All right, let's get in here. Again, sexual violence. Here's a list of really epic social movements that are doing really good work within the topic. I also put up here a stopping sexual violence prevention sheet and some of the things in which people are doing. April, this particular month that I'm recording this, is Sexual Violence Awareness Month, and you will see teal flags. More than likely, this is when you're going to see your Take Back the Nights on campus. You're going to see your marches. You're going to see your a lot of things about resources, a lot of things of that measure. If there is a desire or a want to do a online version of Take Back the Night that we can do virtually for our virtual students, if you guys are interested in that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Maybe we can organize something. I'm more than happy to help you kind of figure out how to organize that and to help as much as I can. But these things matter. There's your green dot is important. Your Title IX office is important. There's a wide variety of resources that you have on campus and off supporting the end to sexual violence. We have a long way to go, but I just want you guys to see that there is a wide variety of resources that are happening that have the intention of doing really positive things. All right, April is also Child Abuse Month, Prevention Month. And that ribbon is like a navy, bluish, like a dark royal or navy blue. I used the definitions I have from a different book as opposed to some of the definitions you have in your book, because I think they're more inclusive and I think that they get at the varying ways in which laws are changing, because they're let's see, there is a lot of things that this book kind of leaves out or kind of generalizes, and I want to make sure that we're making very clear what we're trying to say. So child sex abuse is a broad term, again, that includes all offenses that involve sexually touching, sexual exploitation, sexual assault, or any form of sexual contact with children, and children being a minor under the age of 18. Sexual molestation used to describe when a child is forced, coerced, or threatened to engage in any kind of sexual contact. Usually this is by someone they know. Okay. Child abuse almost always is someone that the person knows, because there's a level of grooming and familiarity that a kid has to have to be and access that a kid has to have, or at a perpetrator has to have to a kid, in order to kind of groom them to think that this is okay. Institutionalized child abuse is really just, again, talking about the ways in which our systems and our institutions are not built to prevent child abuse, let alone to acknowledge it or to deal with it. There's also, again, an access thing here. So those systems where children are exposed to, are those institutions where children are exposed to abuse, are generally education, caregiving. You might see it in sports or coaching. Anytime where you're seeing essentially a person that is in care of kiddos, but is also a person of authority and someone that they know fairly well. There is absolutely no evidence, saying that again, that childhood sex abuse determines someone's sexuality. Okay. So child molestation does not make people gay. All right. That is not to say that queer people do not experience sexual molestation, but it's also to say, it does say that straight people also experience sexual molestation, and that does not determine their sexuality as they age. There's just no credible data that says this or has that makes any sense. Incest is the sexual contact that occurs between any kind of family members. Incest is something that is, again, generally shoved under the rug. It's generally not talked about, but these are the people that have access. You see a lot of child abuse cases, especially sexual abuse, that are incest, that are uncles, that are typically males within the family that have access to the children via family dynamics, whether that be marriage into the family, whether that be intergenerational homes, whether that be family gatherings, et cetera, et cetera. This can be direct or indirect, these harms. I want to remind you that if at any point a child comes up to you and tells you that they are very uncomfortable with being around a particular adult, listen to them. Do not make them be alone with that person. You don't have to push and like mandate that they tell you what's going on, but you can have conversations that are, has this person done, like, has this person in any way, or you just straight up ask them, how have they made you uncomfortable? Have you seen them do something that you know is not okay? Have they done something that is not okay? You can tell me, you can be trusted. Make sure that you are in a trusted space. Make sure you are in an environment that they feel safe. And above all else, damn it, listen to them. Like, hear them, It matters. It's important. And these things have lasting impact. And if that person then ends up seeing you as someone who's going to just put them in that same place or put them in that situation with that person over and over and over again, they're going to see you as untrustworthy. They're going to see you as someone they cannot tell, and they're going to see you as someone who also caused harm, right? Pedophilia, which is someone with sexual preference for or interest in or attraction to children. Pedophilia is not something that is considered an LGBTQ plus population. It is not a recognized sexuality. It is not something that is connected to that community at all. My words. Okay, that does not mean that there's never been a pedophile that was also queer. It means that queer people are not inherently pedophiles. It also means that queer people do not see pedophiles as a legitimate sexuality. Okay. Pedophilia is something that can be treated. It's something that can be worked through. And the reason that that is different than having someone work through their queerness and their sexuality is that queer people can consent. They are adults. They are individuals who can consent to sexual acts. Children are not. So having someone be attracted to or a preference for someone who automatically cannot consent is violent, is inherently a violent thing. So that is not a recognized sexuality. That is a person who has an inherent desire or need to do harm to another human who cannot consent to that particular interaction. Okay. I've got some statistics here. I'm not going to sit here and go through them. If you need resources particularly geared to this particular topic or any of those topics, please do not hesitate to reach out. We will make sure that you have them. All right. Last thing, we're going to talk about social policy real quick in the future. There's a lot of things that may change or have upcoming change. Marriage is always going to look different, right? It's going to adapt. It's going to change. It's going to mold through the course of time. And that's because it always has. It's something that has been there throughout a lot of history, throughout most cultures have some kind of marriage, have some kind of ceremony, of some kind of acknowledgement of legal status of a couple, or more than a couple. This is something that will continue on and continue to evolve as we do that, because biology is going to continue to be there, because reproduction is going to continue to be there, because social intimacy is going to continue to be there. And so there's going to be some measure for that. Reproductive rights are something that we are going to see. It is currently a hot button topic, and it's something that's going to continue to be a hot button topic. And depending on how several more legal cases pan out, will determine kind of what reproductive rights look like moving forward. We talked a little bit about how the parents' rights for trans kiddos and their ability to affirm those kiddos is getting questioned and or getting legally taken away from these parents and from trans people. Trans people have rights getting taken away, left in it, like everywhere. Not everywhere, but the majority of the United States right now. So we're going to see how that impacts, again, social families. It's going to impact specifically these communities. You have a lot of different genetic things happening. We're doing a lot of research in genetics, and that's going to create and build societal conversations surrounding genetically changing or altering fetus in the womb, or genetically changing or altering diseases in kids. Like there's going to be a lot of different conversations about genetics, about particular kinds of medical procedures, and how it impacts future reproductive capabilities. Um, social welfare programs are also going to be something that are ever changing, and they're going to be something that we need to pay attention to when it comes to family, when it comes to how our population is aging, how it comes to um, reproduction, how it comes to caring for children, et cetera, et cetera. Policy surrounding economic, gender, sexuality, racial, disability, and all other identities equality. So you're going to see all of this waxes and wanes, right? You're going to see some progress. You might see some progress. You might see some pushback. You might see some progress. You might see some pushback. And all of these rights will be a continuation of a continued fight until there is a much more equal society. Um, education policies are going to impact families in a variety of ways, whether or not people can go to college, how much of that is funded by the government, how much grant money is available, how much financial aid packets are available, how much um, scholarships are available, how much a for-profit business can continue to make college costs extremely expensive, how much loan forgiveness may end up being out there. There's a wide variety of ways in which educational policy is going to then impact um, families and family dynamics, including how inclusive educational spaces are going to be for marginalized communities. Adoption and family planning policies are going to continue to shape who and when people are allowed to be parents. And that can have some really marginalizing effects for individuals in LGBTQ families and disability related families. There's going to be and it has for all of history. And then you got healthcare policies, which again are going to also impact families in the sense that right now it costs around $30,000 to have a kiddo, to have a baby. Our healthcare system is not designed for, it's designed for emergencies. It's not designed for preventative care. It's not designed for um, things of this nature. If you are in reproductive era, likely you're and you are female, more than likely your insurance costs more than a male of the same age, because they are automatically essentially making you pay for the possibility that you can have a kid and take and have medical procedures that are necessary, like giving birth. All right. All of these things are going to have a wide variety of impacts on families. If you are interested in how they might impact them more directly, or you want to hone in on one of these topics, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can go through them and kind of talk about how they might be impacting society at the time. All right. So that is it for this module. I'm going to get these up and posted. And if you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much. Have a great week.